Vogel Award for the Art of the Essay. Her novel, Binary Star, was a finalist for the Los Angeles Times Art Seidenbaum Award for First Fiction, and she's been published widely in magazines and etc. We'll drop her full bio in the chat. Erica Hall is Executive Committee Vice Chair of the Suncoast Sierra Club, and she works in food and environmental justice, and she will tell you about how her work, very importantly, is intersectional. And we're going to drop her very impressive bio also in the chat. John Freeman is the founder of the literary annual Freeman's and the author and editor of 10 books, including Dictionary of the Undoing, The Park, Tales of Two Planets, The Penguin, Book of Modern American Short Story. He's the former editor of Granta, lives in New York, where he teaches writing at NYU, is executive editor at Knopf. And we'll drop all those bios in the chat, but please welcome your panel.
Hello. Hi, Erica and John. Welcome. Thank you for being here. And I think I would like to start with the fact that we're talking about a work of fiction. John, you've edited a collection on, an anthology on climate change, including work from all genres. And Erica, your background is working on the ground with people face to face in conversation, not necessarily, in a bound book like we do. So I'm wondering what your experiences were independently reading a work of fiction that touches on climate change. What are the unique capabilities of fiction in this, on this topic, do you think?
Well, I'll start. Good evening. Thank you all for having me. My name is Erica Hall. Again, I'm the vice chair of the Suncoast Sierra Club, which is a group of the Sierra Club Florida chapter. I'm also the chair of the Florida Food Policy Council. I live and work on the occupied territory and lands of the Seminole and Tocobaga indigenous people. So let me first give honor and respect to those people. For me, this book brought up a lot of different things. Even though it is a work of fiction, it also, because of me living here in Florida, I live in St. Petersburg, I work intersectionally with food, climate change, coastal hazards. We do a lot of work, intersectionally. So a lot of the book seemed to be centered around that. Like every story has some sort of element to, climate change. So for me, it brought up a lot of the work that we do, trying to educate the community. And at the same time, it brought up a darkness as a person of color. In the state of Florida. I'm a new Floridian. I relocated from Washington, D.C. About 4 years ago, and I have a connection to all the locations of the panelists. I'm a New Yorker born and raised, so I grew up going to the Brooklyn Public Museum. I lived in Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia for 14 years before I relocated here. So I have that connection to all of the people involved. But to be here in Florida now, it's the most unique place, I'd have to say, environmentally and ecologically, of all the places that I've lived. And this book kind of hit on a lot of it, from the swamp to the hurricanes. Right now, we're preparing for hurricane preparedness, communities of color, coastal hazard, the air quality, water, a lot of things. So it was beautifully written, but at the same time, it kind of brought up a lot of other things, HB1, racial and social injustice, and it just stirred up a lot of things. So I'll leave it there and we'll continue the conversation. But again, I'm so honored to be here, and thank you all for having me.
Thank you so much. John, do you want to follow that up? Because I can follow it up, but I'm very interested to hear from you too, as an editor and somebody who works across genres.
First of all, thank you for having me again at the Brooklyn Public Library and having this series. I love your book, Sunshine State, Sarah, and Erica. I'm hugely admiring of what you do down there in Florida, and it's an honor to share a panel with you and discuss this book, which I think is a remarkable work of fiction, precisely because of many of the things that you just said, Erica, which is, that it's a prismatic view of all the various ways in which the climate is not simply a backdrop to our existence. And as an editor, I frequently encounter fiction which feels like it's being projected onto the green screen of a setting, and in my experience, having visited Florida but never lived there, its ecosystems, its environments are anything but a green screen. They're deeply changing the way that people live, and they're determining and changing social and economic structures there. And I think this book is a very interesting example of how you can build out a complex ecosystem as part of a character of the book. And if I had to make an analogy in a literary sense, this to me seems like Winesburg, Ohio, but with the environment as one of the characters, instead of just simply the town being, the sort of setting for human-centric action. And that's a loose analogy because Winesburg, Ohio is set in one place in one time frame, and this is set in very different places in Florida with different characters. But it does
too.
But it feels like they're all in conversation. And I also love the way that Lauren has developed a way of writing into the emotional logic which proceeds out of extractive and sort of imperial histories. And I'll just leave it at that. I think it's a wonderful book.
Yeah, it occurs to me that we read about climate change all the time in scientific studies and in the news and on Twitter and even in well, I'll just leave it at that. But that fiction allows us to hold so much complexity, precisely for the reasons that you just said, John. But maybe in a way that allows us to get into the feeling of climate change more than statistics can, and allows the story to hold all the intersectionality that, Erica, you work on every day, because we can see that people are alive inside a dying planet. And Lauren really gets at what that feels like, the rage at the center, the rage and sadness and futility at the center of that all. And so let's talk about that. How is anger, how is rage, how is this feeling of hopelessness and yet behind the work that we have to do to save ourselves? maybe behind the work that Lauren is doing in the book,
He's kind of, and I think John kind of alluded to this a little bit, and I'll let him expand on this, but the feeling of dread and anxiety, like, even, the common thread, there weren't a lot of positive stories. This wasn't an uplifting where, yeah, we're going to ride off in the beautiful sunshine and, go to the beach and everything. No, every story, there was something a little dark, a little sinister, or, the thoughts were it just had a real complex relationship with the environment, whether it was alligators or being in a swamp or scared of the elements, really, like everyone was afraid of the worst that could happen in the environment. And for me, again, it takes me back to, if we really cared that much about the environment, we do a better job of protecting the environment. But it's only when you're faced with imminent danger with the environment, or the thought of what could be the worst thing, then people start to panic. So I kind of sense that, John, and you had mentioned it. So if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, I think anxiety is an understandable response to uncertainty. And a lot of the characters in this story collection are faced with a variety of uncertainties, some of them familiar, like what their place is in a family life. Some of them, their uncertainties have to do with just simply the stability of the environment around them. There are a lot of children here that are kind of feeling a bit orphaned, or in some cases in the midnight zone, it's a mother who's taken her children on vacation, and she's suddenly huddled with them in the middle of a storm, being stalked maybe by a wild animal. And I think the estrangement that we've perfected in North America, and especially in cities, from the natural environment, has created in us a kind of dread of what the natural environment is and what it requires and how we're abusing it. And and I find this book really interesting because Lauren Groff is a Yankee. She's from Cooperstown, New York. You read her first story collection, it's very different from this one. And that book is haunted by her kind of Yankee ancestors, her Presbyterian kind of puritanical roots, if you will. I don't know if she's actually Presbyterian, but I read it as such. And then in this book, she comes to the South, and there's a very different kind of guilt that's lurking. It's an environmental guilt. It's a racial guilt. And Erica has brought up the work that she does and its intersectionality. And I think one of the really interesting ways in which dread manifests itself here is in the kind of connection between environmental abuses and kind of lethal misogyny, in the sense that there are women walking on the street here always worry about whether it's safe, and they're angry about worrying about whether it's safe. And I find that this is one of the it's not rare, but it's fairly rare works of fiction in which that connection between environmental destruction and misogyny is made very clear.
I want to sneak in a summary of the book because I realize I've forgotten to do that. Or maybe we can all collaborate on a summary of the book. And actually, maybe this is a good time to point out that, to talk about the white gaze, because a lot of the protagonists in this story collection are white women, and that is intentional. And so I would like to talk about what the white gaze is doing in this book, and toward doing that, let's talk about what some of the stories are about. In the first, we had, so in many of the stories, there's a sort of repeating character who is a mother concerned about her children facing the death of the world before they can even learn what's wonderful about it, and in another story we have sisters, mixed race sisters, abandoned on an island together, their mother having run off to escape a hurricane, and in another, in a few others, hurricanes, which I wanted to talk about too. So can you help me with the ones that I'm forgetting because I'm on the spot? Erica and John, what was your favorite story? Oh, Erica, I can't hear you.
Yeah, I'm on mute. For me, probably one of the favorites that was the ghost story. That first one, Ghost and Empties. That one was good because it was very, she made it very about her sons, and just, it was just very morbid. And, you know, you could see that the anxiety about certain things, like the world was going to come to an end, kind of like what John said, like the disaster. It wasn't positive. Everything was just very like dismal and down and depressing. So that one was, and you know, it seemed like she was haunted by visions of maybe the past, of what's to come, of the future, of what's the worst that could happen, you know, with the environment. So again, for me, I look through it with a racial and social equity lens too. So as you said, that white gaze, right? So it's told, and another point that I noticed, she made a lot of unimplied references to wealth. Like she was kind of mocking, like acknowledging, like John said, to the point that, you know, none of these people were really, only a few with the homeless, the story about the homeless family, but most of the people had wealth, or they had homes, and they were pretty much socioeconomically more well off than a lot of communities of color, let's say that. So again, for me, looking at it through that lens, noticing how as a person of color, we look at the environment through a different lens. So, you know, the way they envisioned it, white privilege allows you access to certain things within that. Whereas as a person of color, your reaction, you know, things may be a little different. So it was an interesting book. It was very interesting. And to look at it is, as we said, race and climate change, you know, how it affects different people, how we educate about composting and food waste and a connection to the environment, and how my work with the Sierra Club is so important, that we reach out to these communities to, you know, help them understand that this stuff is just as important for you as it is for these people, these suburbanite women living in these, you know, environments. So it was real poignant for me to notice that difference.
There's a question actually that's come up in the chat related to this, and it says, in what way is the white gaze implied when climate affects us all? So, and that's a good question. So, in one of the stories, there's a woman who is vacationing in Brazil, and there's a hurricane that blows through, and she has to take shelter in a bodega, or in a mini mart across the street from the very nice bed and breakfast where she's been staying. And the tension, the racial tension in that scene is very palpable, and the class, and so is the class difference. And I think, you know, there's a way in which Lauren Groff is exploring, you know, is exploring white privilege in this, which I think also applies to Florida, the tourism industry, you know, and how it has contributed to changes in these places, you know, where people like this character are vacationing. So as an example, you know, and this character as a foreigner in this place, casting her gaze on people who live there every day. Did either of you pick up on that tension in the story?
Yeah, and for me, another thing is, you were saying that women were like at the forefront of these stories, right? So women like at the forefront of climate action, but they weren't really advocates. They weren't advocating, like, say, on campaigns around clean air, clean water. They were, you know, commiserating over certain environmental scenarios, but they weren't very pro advocacy, pro policy. So that's one thing I noticed. But at the same time, she's showing how women are at the full, like the the main stories about women and their role with climate action. So that was interesting to me. Like there were really no men that were the central figures, were they? Unless I'm missing something.
No.
But if I recall, all of the like main leads were women. So I also thought as a woman, I connected to that part of those stories as well.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
absolutely.
only in the second story, at the Round Earth's Imagined Corners, where
Oh, yeah, that's right. Judith. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
is the main character, and his
Right.
whole role is to sell off the land that his father
Right.
amassed through forms of economic violence, and he's unraveling, and he doesn't know what his purpose is, and in some ways this feels like a story about the untenability of certain notions of what it means to be a man, and in a world in which everything in geography is under threat, and that the world built by the kinds of amassing of wealth that Jude's father has done is gone, or if it's not gone, then it's certainly it has ramifications that he cannot pass on to his children without a heavy emotional and ethical tax. I want to come back to this idea of the gaze, because I think Lauren, one of the ways that she situates these stories is that her characters, they live in a landscape of loneliness, and I think the suburbs are a domestic imperialism. It's an attempt to create an imperial empire over land and space and water, and it was often done at great cost to localities and already deeply enmeshed networks of people living in what were then smaller towns and villages. And the suburbs pushes everybody out and into greater distance from each other. And this is where the kind of neighborhoods in which one thread of Lauren's narrators are living. And she chronicles the cost of that lack of engagement. As in the first story, the ghost in it is kind of her. She's walking through her neighborhood, looking at people. She's always at a distance. And yeah, she can acknowledge that certain people in certain parts of her neighborhood are homeless or squatting. She can acknowledge that certain people are living there, but she's not enmeshed in them in the way that you are in community. And just to take an example, like you read a novel like Sula by Toni Morrison, in which all those women are deeply enmeshed in each other's lives, or Song of Solomon, or I don't know, Tar Baby, which is another kind of Floridian type book. And you compare that to the women in Florida who are miserable. They're miserable. All they have is themselves. They've completely lost connection to all the outer reaches of their community. So of course they're frightened. Mm-hmm. and lonely, and I think Lauren is some ways narrating the consequences of that double estrangement from community and from landscape.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of landscape, I wanted to return to the second story, the one about Jude and his father and the land sales. And I love how subtly Lauren weaves the history of Florida into these stories and traces its ramifications in the changing landscape and and how it's led us here. I think in a way Florida was the perfect place to set this book. It's the canary in the coal mine of climate change. We have more species than any other state, and they're dying more quickly because it's so fucking hot here. And it's and it represents the extreme of every other, I think, section of society that she's trying to get at, you know, the extreme gap in wealth, the, you know, the continued segregation in the state, and the differential ways that climate change affects people because of those differences. And so I wanted to talk about that too, and how, I mean, there are many barriers to fixing the problem of homelessness, you know, many barriers to repairing the deep wounds that racism has wrought on this country, and many barriers to, you know, to fixing the problem of the whole way we treat gender in this country. But I want to talk about how, like, what are the barriers to helping all these different sections of society plus climate change, you know? I mean, when, I don't know, I think I'll leave it at that. You know, how does climate change what is, Erica, in your work, you know, what are the specific ways that you're helping people of color in Florida, or people experiencing homelessness in Florida, for instance, because who are suffering right now the effects of climate change?
It's such a complex problem, right? Especially homelessness. And as you say that, I was just on a continuum of care here in Pinellas County. As a result of a study done about the disparities in homelessness here in Pinellas, and how I think 10% or 12% of the population is African American, but 32% of the homeless population is African American, and the metrics around that. So that was just like, for me, that was mind blowing, because coming from New York City and living in DC and living in LA, you're used to homelessness, but on a lot, because those are large cities. So to come to a place like St. Pete and see that density of homelessness in the middle of, like you said, the whole climate change and you know, coastal hazard and hurricane season. For me, it's all about education, right? And it's about making sure that we inform the communities around us. So part of the way that I do that is my work with the Sierra Club, doing virtual. We're slowly starting to do more in-person virtual meetings in town hall, but virtual meetings, talking about, I partner with the NAACP. Florida is the only state that has a person designated full-time, which is the environmental and climate justice organizer. So there's one person that's specifically dedicated to the state of Florida that works throughout all 67 counties at the local branches with the NAACP on the ground communities and educating, along with, you know, the League of Women Voters and, you know, the local communities, just kind of building this network of coalition where we educate the communities that live in these areas, the business communities, whether it's the fisheries, the small mom and pop businesses that are located in these areas, you know, that we let them know that these are the effects and this is what can happen. Please educate yourself. So that's one of the ways that we do it. As my role as the chair of the Florida Food Policy Council, is the same work there, but working to address the gaps around food sovereignty, food insecurity, food justice, growing your food, helping people understand policy and advocacy. Like in St. Pete, we had the city council pass an ordinance that allowed people to grow food in their yard, but also sell the food that they grow, because we're in a pandemic, we're in a racial economic crisis, people have lost their jobs. Why not add that extra component, which is community economic development? So it's just really basically just educating people and informing people about programs that already exist. The pandemic EBT, the pandemic SNAP program, Medicaid and Medicare, how seniors qualify for those programs, that they don't even know because the rollout is not effective, right? So we're not going to these places that people need to hear. So it's all about your community, your partners, your stakeholders. So that's just one way that I spend time making sure that I inform all the communities intersectionally that I work with around health disparities and everything else that comes with that.
Something else I was thinking about reading this book was just how much we stand to lose with climate change that isn't obvious, you know, and I wondered if either of you were thinking about that as you read, because her writing is so subtle, you know. Yeah, there are so many.
I think that relates actually to what Erica was just saying. I mean, how do you scale catastrophe when it's on top of a catastrophe
Yeah.
of 150,000 people being food insecure in St. Peter and Pinellas County, you know, which is stacked on top of other catastrophes that Erica is addressing in her work. There's no answer to that, but one of them is, since we're talking about a work of fiction, you know, where does the book situate us, you know, and how does it help us enter this world of collapsing structures and deep struggle? You know, from what angles are we looking at this struggle?
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I think Lauren is a deeply disciplined but also careful writer about where she has us looking from. You know, I think she knows her limits and she doesn't want to overstretch where she puts a point of view to create a kind of reverse colonialism of imagining. And you know,
Absolutely, John. I agree. And I, as you said that to make a point, she didn't really, it's kind of unimplied, but it's kind of implied about monumentalism, right? And the built environment, and how the built environment and my work with urban planners and architects and people, sustainability, resiliency experts that work for U.S. Green Building Council and American Planning Association and all these experts, right? Public health people. The built environment is a major component of systemic racism in the environment and in the landscape. And without her really saying it, she kind of goes right there without saying it, but you can kind of, as I said, it's your own interpretation. So for me, my interpretation took me a little further, that she was also saying that the built environment could be playing a part in this whole climate change, you know, fiasco that we're having, and monumentalism, and, you know, our fixation with these structures, how we need to reassess and reevaluate how effective they are for green buildings, for safe places, for safe spaces, you know, for all of the things that are contributing to what's happening. So I also read that into it as well. Maybe I'm reading too much into it and you all didn't pick that up, but I guess, you know, for me, that's another element that I got from.
I want to open it up to the audience now, if there are any questions for the panelists. Okay, so I noticed a thread of ambivalence and anxiety around motherhood, especially in the linked stories, but in many others too, that seem to mirror the instability and anxiety of the characters in relation to the environment. Does this resonate with anyone else? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I picked up on that as well, and feel that anxiety, you know?
Yeah, and absolutely. It goes back to John's point about the dread and anxiety. And as a parent, like, what am I leaving to, you know, my children, to my grandchildren, the next generation. So John, it goes back to your point about that whole sense of dread, right? And anxiety as a parent, that as you see these things collapsing, how, what are we doing to make it better for? And as a parent, that's what a lot of that thread is about, the imminent dread of that.
I think it's about, finding a reason to carry on, I mean, even if you think, even if you think it's futile, what else do you do when these tiny people are depending on you? You have to maintain at least the performance of hope on a daily basis, right? I felt that. And how do you protect? I mean, something else that I was thinking about reading this book, I mean, something that I thought, isn't perhaps so obvious that we stand to lose with climate change are metaphors, So how are we going to read our literature 100 years from now when we come across a storm that to us seems rather minor because our metric for severe storms is so severe now, is so much more severe now. Or, are we even going to have time to read with so many stories? How do we read when all of our books are flooded?
It does feel like a new kind of genre, like of environmental Gothic.
It
Yeah,
does.
absolutely. I think you hit something with that. I see in the chat, Kristen said this book was so suffused with dread, it was soaking in it. So thank you. So it wasn't just us, John. Other people felt like it was just so, she had this sense of just foreboding dread and misery that'll be coming. Like, if you don't do this, this will happen. So yes, thank you for mentioning that.
I mean, every single story begins in some way, above and below. She'd been kept awake all night by the palm berries clattering on the roof, and when she woke to the sun blazing through the window, she'd had enough. And it's, I mean, it is it's almost like the environmental triffids have come out and are like kind of clacking in the breeze, sort of coming after them. And this character is broke, and she's drowning in debt.
She's actually under a mountain of debt.
Yeah.
And she's slithering out from underneath.
Yes.
And yeah, which is so, I mean, it just speaks to Lauren's skill.
Yeah.
Every one of her sentences is
and
so...
her story resonated with me. That one in particular, as we were talking about homelessness and the extreme heat and, the effect it has on him, like that story was like, wow, like that. It was fiction, but it could have been a real life story of anyone that we've seen in Florida out here in the hot sun during those conditions.
I actually saw somebody in the chat a little bit earlier say that people that homeless migrate south where it's warmer, but actually, and which has been historically true. St. Petersburg was known as a great place to be homeless. It had a reputation for being a great place to be homeless for years, but that's not going to be the case anymore. There's not, I mean, our flood zone, it keeps getting higher, there's not going to, and it keeps getting hotter and the storms keep getting more severe.
So, right. And that's why the work that I'm doing is so important, that this is stuff, Sarah, what you just said, that's so important for everyday people without law degrees and PhDs and all of these things. Just what you just said, that simplest part, that if we don't do something soon, this will happen. So like that, at the end of the day, that's the message. Like, this is something that's serious. And I think people are slowly starting to get it, but I still think we have a long way to go in terms of legislation, policy, advocacy, just, supporting people on the ground. Florida's behind with solar energy and just uplifting the solar community. And, there's just a lot of things. So I just hope it's not too late when they do finally decide to be more proactive.
Joel asks, is Florida also tending to criminalize the feeding of homeless people?
Well, that HB1, you all familiar with the legislation similar to the one in Georgia and throughout many states, um, voter suppression laws. HB1 is Florida's version of that. So yeah, it pretty much, Joel, in essence, does that. And again, I'm working on the ground with groups that are mobilizing to raise money to educate communities about this and how to protect themselves. I was on a call on over the weekend, Friday and Saturday, with attorneys that are women at the intersection of civil rights law and environmental justice. So it's women that worked from all over LA, New York, for the government, that were really providing a lot of valuable insight to, organizers and advocates such as myself on the ground, and that are leaders of volunteers, how to, keep going, even with these suppressive voter suppression tactics. So it's just a lot. It's a lot to process. So again, for me, this book kind of stirred up a lot of different things aside just from the obvious fiction.
Donna points out in the chat about that story, about the story Above and Below, that the fact that this is a white character in a great amount of debt suggests it's not merely the white gaze, but privilege. And those are two different. I think one of the great things about this book is that she gives us a variety of situations, and that each of these characters finds herself in a unique situation. So I didn't mean to imply that that it was merely the white gaze, simply that the white gaze exists in the book and is an important part of it, right? But she also talks about, this story. I think that white poverty is also a huge problem in this country, and one that she explores in the book.
It's real too. And in Florida, it's definitely real. And I know, traveling through rural parts of Florida as well as urban. So it's a real thing. That's why a lot of outreach I do with the Food Policy Council is done in rural communities, and the indigenous community, the farm workers, because there's the lack of access to that stuff. So yeah, it's a deep issue.
I think this book also creates interesting differences within languages of powerlessness.
Mm-hmm.
We're all feeling very powerless now before the scale of the disaster, which is already here, but still feels like it's bearing down on us. That being the climate disaster, but there are several other disasters that we feel unable to correct, and the gap between the super uber rich in this country and everyone else has grown to such catastrophic levels that when discussing privilege and power, the words almost become meaningless between the scale of difference between what it means to be worth 5 billion or 10 billion, or to be Matt Gates's father, who sold his HMO for $500 million. What's the difference between that and to be merely making six figures, which in many Florida cities is not really. It could almost end up being lower middle class wages for a family of five. So I think the fiction is very necessary as a narrative tool to develop new ways of expressing powerlessness. And in doing that, I think it forms new possibilities of connection in spaces of powerlessness. That's what I think one of the things Lauren Groff is bringing to the table, besides chimneying dread, which all of us are feeling.
Yeah, and I think something that a line of hers that has continued to resonate with me since I finished this book earlier this week is that sometimes the things you love can kill you. And I actually gave this advice to a friend of mine earlier today. I said, love what loves you back, and because she was in a difficult situation and feeling really powerless. And I said, you have to love what loves you back, even if you don't love yourself, and even if you don't love the world right now, find the one thing that you love that can love you back. Because, and I think that's what Lauren Groff gets at in this book too. I think that's why there are so many children in this book, actually. It's that kind of love that we have to hold on to, that we have to believe exists. Right.
She's a poet of domestic spaces in many ways. You see that in Acadia and Fates and Furies, and is an interesting chronicler of what happens when different pressures bear down on that, on those spaces. And it's hard. We haven't yet talked about how stressful the marriages feel in this book. I feel like the one thread that's slightly autofictional, but it's useless to speculate how much, but it sounds the tones of autofiction and the closeness between Groff's own life and the life of the character. And I feel like it makes a lot of emotional use out of the proximity of those two things, character to creator. And Erica mentioned the fact that women are on the front lines of climate change, and I think one of the things that this book is chronicling is like the fact that many of the narrators and characters they're the ones who are having to keep shit together, and it's yet another pressure on a marriage where they're already doing marriages where they're already doing more than their fair share. Mm-hmm. Does that resonate with? Does that sound like the book that you read too, Sarah?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think she's exploring the kind of what we were talking about earlier, multi-layered, multivalent trauma of this time. The stress between genders, the stress between classes, stress between races, stress of a dying planet, stress of being a parent on a dying planet. And yet, I mean, I actually think that she ends on I love that she ends this book on a moment of hope. And it might not seem that way because the image is so ominous, but she stops. Maybe I'll just read the last. I see John opening his book and it's a signal to me. So it's this character on a beach with her sons in France, escaping this unhappy marriage, or that is in the background of her mind the whole time. But so the older boy is now the size of a thumb out on the rocks. He's gone too far for her to save him in a calamity. Rogue wave, kidnapper, but the mother doesn't call for him. There's something so resolute in the set of his shoulders. He isn't going anywhere, just away. She understands. When she looks back at her younger son, he is holding a rock over his head. He's aiming at the snail. Boom, he whispers, but he keeps his arm in the air and he holds his fingers closed. I think, well, what does that image say to you, John? I mean, I think that image really speaks to me, but, and I could interpret it, but, well, maybe I will. Okay. To me, ending before he drops the rock, before he smashes the snail, before he does the cruel thing. I think she's holding on to the innocence in that moment. I think she's holding on to the hope in that moment. Yeah, I don't know. I think there's that whispered awareness of what he could do, but doesn't yet, but might. So it's precarity, it's that moment of precarity that she holds so amazing, so deftly throughout this entire book. So I want to scroll back and just see if there are any. Oh yeah, so many of the characters appear to suffer from what has been called climate change related pre-traumatic stress disorder, anticipatory anxiety about climate breakdown. Does that resonate with either of you?
Oh yeah, that was evident throughout the whole thing. And people I see in the chat made points about, as you said, John, relationships. And I don't know if she was referring to the one story where she lost her above and below, where she was sleeping on the beach and she lost her boyfriend. Somebody in the chat said that they noticed that was a theme, that the relationships and the marriages were not very strong and very empowering and nurturing. So like this whole environmental thing kind of destroyed the fabric of their relationship too.
Yeah, I feel like that story that Sarah just read and ended with, then on top of having to hold many of the families together in the book, and on top of sort of being on the front line of the climate crisis, a lot of the women also carry the barrier of reprogramming the male species, which feels like that's one of the things that Lauren is commenting on in that last image of like, will I raise a kind of future sociopathic boy / man child, and in many of the cases throughout the book, when women aren't part of that kind of project of reprogramming, they end up like the character in Above and Below. They're kind of caromed out of the social network, and are sort of like free, sleeping on the beach. And so I this book was published in 2018, which felt like midway through the last 1,000 years. It's like just everything felt super shitty. And I don't know. I remember reading this book at the time, feeling like, oh my God, thank God someone has acknowledged, how like how extra shitty it feels, and just in every regard. And I think Lauren Groff is such a great master of tone, and her ability to kind of like swerve between that kind of holy shit, this is so terrible, to going into a character and showing you their kind of inner vulnerabilities is so deft.
Yeah, and the irony, I moved here at the same time that book. I moved here the end of March of 2018. So, and I recently read the book. So to kind of, in retrospect, look back and kind of see my life from moving here and all the work that I've done after leaving my firm that I was working at and immersing myself full time into this work as a volunteer, that just how different my life has been around this whole environmental thing. So it's a whirlwind. It really is.
Erica, one of the things I feel like this book is a meditation on is the costs of individualism. Like all these characters do seem kind of isolated in their what they have to carry, and sometimes it's because their husbands aren't helping them. Sometimes it's because they're wedded to suburban life. And volunteerism to me is the future. Like we have to kind of give up on macro thinking about that someone will come in from above with parachutes to rescue all of our problems. And it was how as many people got out to vote as they did in spite of the pandemic. And I'm wondering if you feel like the spirit of volunteerism is moving in Florida.
Yes, it is. It's alive and well. And I think not just in Florida, but around the country, as we saw in Georgia, the ground game for the organizing campaigns was stellar. It kind of took you back to the 60s and how the ground game was, but now we have social media and digital tools and technology and Stacey Abrams. So we had a different ground game, but yeah, volunteerism is alive and well. I mean, I left my career as a legal professional during Black Lives Matter, as the only person of color at my firm, I no longer felt safe mentally, physically. I think I was suffering from PTSD of many different sorts, and I had to make a fundamental decision to leave. And when I left, I said, okay, well, that energy, what is that going to go in that time? Rather than push papers for rich folks, let me do what's important. And it brought me to this. And I've been meeting other people that have had that epiphany, John, as you say, that have walked away from, the big salaries and the big money, and have decided that, and even the younger people, I'm finding it too on college campuses, Sierra Club student coalitions, and there's a buzz of coalitions at the student level. American Association of University Women, the Sierra Club, all these groups that are young women and women and young men too on campuses that have that whole volunteerism advocacy policy thing again. So that, for me, if there's anything that's positive out of this, is that I see that the next generation has decided to recreate this movement of volunteerism and community service and servant leadership. And that's very important for our success going forward, especially in climate change and everything that we're doing. So thank you all. This was amazing. I was so honored to be here with Sarah, with John. Thank you to Joel and to everyone. And thank you for this book, Lauren. And thank you all. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you so much, John and Erica and Joel and Orion Magazine and everybody for coming tonight. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Oh, yes, Orion. Shout out to Orion. I didn't forget you. All of the best. Thank you so much for everything.
Thank you.
I'm going to just underline that to say thanks, Sarah, for hosting, and John for your excellent thoughts, and Erica for all of your thoughts and the work that you do down there in Florida. The time always flies, and I hate to say goodbye, but please stay in touch, and don't forget to check out Writers Rebel New York City as well as Orion. And we just posted a way for you to subscribe. I think Orion is offering people on this Zoom a 20% discount if you subscribe. And as I understand it, John himself has an essay or review in the latest issue. So I look forward to reading that.
I put my email in the chat if anybody wants to hear about work I'm doing intersectionally or be a part of it. Just please feel free to reach out, or if you know anybody here in Florida that you think may want to work with us.
Absolutely. Thanks again, everyone. Good night.